My parents abandoned me for my golden child 16-year-old pregnant sister. But then the 2 pink lines on Hannah's pregnancy test weren't just a sign of a new life, they were a death sentence for mine. Or at least, that's how it felt at 17, standing in our sterile, beige bathroom, watching my perfect little sister's world implode, and knowing, with a sickening certainty, that mine would be collateral damage. I'm Olivia, 28 now. Back then, I was on the precipice of everything I'd ever wanted. Senior year, top of my class, early acceptance to Stanford, the golden ticket out of our stifling California town and the suffocating expectations of my parents, Richard and Eleanor. Hannah, 16, was the family artist, the free spirit, the one who got away with everything. I was the responsible one, the one who always did the right thing, the one they could always ignore. It wasn't that they didn't love me, not exactly. It was more like they didn't see me. My achievements were expected, taken for granted, like the air they breathed. Hannah's slightest accomplishment, a mediocre painting, a passing grade in a class she'd nearly failed, was met with parades and celebrations. The unfairness of it all had been a slow-burning ember in my chest for years, but Hannah's pregnancy? That was the gasoline that turned it into an inferno. Our parents' reaction was predictable, in its own twisted way. You'd think they'd be furious, devastated, maybe even a little disappointed in Hannah. Instead, they went into full-on protection mode. Not for the unborn child, mind you, but for Hannah, their precious, fragile, irresponsible Hannah. The family meeting, more like a sentencing hearing, was held in the living room, the same room where Hannah's art, mostly abstract splatters of paint that I secretly thought looked like toddler vomit, was proudly displayed, while my academic awards were relegated to a dusty shelf in the garage. My father, Richard, a man who communicated primarily through sighs and disappointed glances, barely spoke. My mother, Eleanor, however, was in her element, orchestrating a crisis, playing the martyr, and laying down the law. And the law, in this case, was that I was the solution. Because I was older, because I was responsible, because, and this is the phrase that will forever be etched in my memory, you were the older sister, Olivia, you need to step up, it was my duty to sacrifice my dreams for Hannah's. My Stanford acceptance? Deferred, indefinitely. My meticulously planned future? On hold. My life? Collateral damage. They didn't phrase it as a demand, of course. It was couched in the language of family, of support, of doing what's right. They'd graciously allow me to live at home rent-free, while I worked full-time to help with the baby expenses, to contribute to Hannah's new life, a life she'd chosen, a life I was now expected to subsidize. I remember looking at Hannah, sprawled on the couch, a smug, self-satisfied expression on her face. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She just smirked. That smirk was the final straw. It was the realization that she expected this, that she felt entitled to my sacrifice, that she saw me not as a sister, but as a convenient solution to her problems. The unfairness of it all choked me. The years of being overlooked, of being the easy child, the one who never caused trouble, the one whose needs always came second, it all coalesced into a hard, bitter knot in my stomach. I'd played by their rules, I'd excelled, I'd done everything right, and for what? To be punished for my sister's mistakes? I'm not doing it, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm going to Stanford. I'm not throwing away my future for Hannah. The explosion that followed was predictable, but no less devastating. My mother launched into a tirade, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, of not loving my sister, of not understanding the meaning of family. My father just looked defeated, his silence more damning than any words. Hannah, of course, played the victim, tears welling up in her eyes, her voice a pathetic whimper. I thought you loved me, Olivia, she sobbed. I thought you'd be there for me. It was all a performance. And for the first time, I didn't buy it. They didn't kick me out, not in so many words. But they made it clear that I was no longer welcome, that I had betrayed them, that I had chosen my own selfish desires over the needs of my family. My mother stopped speaking to me, except to issue curt instructions or pointed criticisms. My father retreated further into his shell, his silence a constant, heavy presence in the house. Hannah? She reveled in her newfound power, flaunting her pregnancy, demanding attention, and generally making my life a living hell. The atmosphere was thick with guilt and accusation. I was walking on eggshells. Every conversation was an argument. So, I made a plan. I wouldn't defer Stanford. I wouldn't abandon my dreams. But I couldn't stay there, in that toxic environment, not another day. My escape route came in the form of my Aunt Carol, my father's sister, a woman who'd always been the rebel of the family, the one who dared to live life on her own terms. She lived in Washington, a small, quirky town a world away from our California suburb. And she offered me a lifeline. Leaving was the hardest and easiest thing I'd ever done. Hard, because I was leaving behind everything I'd ever known, the only family I had, however dysfunctional. Easy, because I knew, with a certainty that burned in my soul, that I was doing the right thing. I was choosing myself, for the first time in my life. I packed a single suitcase, mostly clothes and a few textbooks, a tangible representation of my meager possessions and my boundless ambitions. I didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. I just slipped away, like a ghost, disappearing into the early morning mist, leaving behind the wreckage of my childhood and the shattered remnants of my family. Aunt Carol welcomed me with open arms, a warm hug, and a cup of strong coffee. Her small house, nestled among towering pine trees, felt like a sanctuary, a safe haven from the storm I'd left behind. She didn't pry, didn't pressure me to talk, just offered me a place to stay, a listening ear, and the unconditional support I'd so desperately craved. She helped me find a part-time job waiting tables. It wasn't glamorous, but I was making my own money. I started looking at other colleges. Ones I could afford. The first few months were a blur of adjustments, of navigating a new town, a new school, a new life. I was lonely, homesick, and constantly battling the guilt that my parents had so expertly instilled in me. But I was also free. Free from the constant comparisons, the suffocating expectations, the crushing weight of being the responsible one. I could breathe. I could think. I could be. I enrolled in a local community college, a far cry from Stanford, but a step in the right direction. I worked hard, juggling classes and work, determined to make the most of this second chance, this unexpected detour in my life's journey. I made friends, slowly, cautiously, learning to trust again, to open myself up to new possibilities. My parents called, occasionally. At first, it was mostly my mother, her voice laced with a mixture of anger and self-pity. She accused me of abandoning them, of being selfish, of ruining Hannah's life. Then, the calls became less frequent, more desperate. Hannah was struggling, they were drowning in debt, my father's health was failing. The guilt trips were relentless, a constant reminder of the burden I'd supposedly left behind. Hannah never called. Never texted. Never acknowledged my existence. It was as if I'd ceased to exist, erased from her life, a convenient solution to her problems that had dared to malfunction. Years passed. I graduated from community college, transferred to a state university, and eventually earned a degree in business administration. I discovered a passion for marketing, for the art of connecting with people, of telling stories, of building brands. I started my own small consulting firm, working from my tiny apartment, fueled by caffeine and a fierce determination to succeed, to prove to myself, and to my family, that I was more than just the responsible one, that I was capable of achieving great things, on my own terms. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, failures, moments of doubt when I questioned my choices, when I wondered if I should have just stayed home, swallowed my pride, and played the role they'd assigned me. But then I'd remember Hannah's smirk, my mother's cold disapproval, my father's silent defeat, and I'd keep going, pushing forward, driven by a force I couldn't quite name, a force that was both fierce and fragile. I heard snippets of news about my family through Aunt Carol. Hannah had dropped out of high school, of course. Jake, the misunderstood boyfriend, had vanished shortly after the baby, a little girl named Lily, was born. My parents had become full-time caregivers, their lives consumed by the demands of a child they hadn't planned for, a child they were ill-equipped to raise. Hannah drifted from one low-paying job to another, always blaming someone else for her failures, always expecting a handout, always. Hannah. Then, the inevitable happened. 10 years after I'd left, 10 years after I'd been deemed the selfish one, the ungrateful daughter, I received a phone call. It was my mother, her voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to the commanding tone I remembered. Hannah was in trouble again. Big trouble. This time, it wasn't just a teenage pregnancy or a failed relationship. It was serious, involving the law, potential jail time, and a mountain of debt that dwarfed anything she'd accumulated before. They were desperate. They'd exhausted all their resources, their savings, their retirement funds, their credit, everything. They were on the verge of losing their house, and my father's health, already fragile, was deteriorating rapidly. They needed help. And they were finally, turning to me. The irony was bitter, a cruel twist of fate that almost made me laugh. The daughter they'd discarded, the one they'd deemed unworthy, the one they'd burdened with the responsibility for everyone else's mistakes, was now their only hope. The responsible one was now the rescuer. I listened to my mother's tearful pleas, her desperate promises, her hollow assurances that things would be different this time, that they'd learned their lesson, that they appreciated me. And a part of me, the part that still yearned for their love, their acceptance, the part that still felt the phantom weight of being the older sister, wanted to believe her. But the other part, the part that had been forged in the crucible of their rejection, the part that had built a life for myself, on my own terms, knew better. I agreed to help. But not on their terms. On mine. I flew back to California, not to stay, not to return to the suffocating confines of my childhood home, but to assess the situation, to offer what assistance I could, from a distance, to draw a line in the sand. Seeing them again, after all those years, was jarring. My parents looked old, worn down, defeated, the vibrant, controlling figures I remembered reduced to shadows of their former selves. My father, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and regret, could barely meet my gaze. My mother, her usual armor of self-righteousness cracked and crumbling, clung to me, her touch desperate, almost pleading. Hannah. Well, Hannah was Hannah. Still defiant, still blaming everyone else for her problems, still expecting me to swoop in and fix everything, to make it all go away, but there was something different about her, too. A flicker of fear, a hint of vulnerability, a recognition, perhaps, that she'd finally gone too far. My old room, the one Hannah had coveted, the one that had become the nursery for Lily, was a testament to their shattered dreams, a physical representation of their chaotic, dysfunctional lives. It was filled with baby clothes, toys, and the lingering scent of failure. The perfect family they'd envisioned, the one they'd sacrificed me for, had never materialized. Instead, they were trapped, drowning in a sea of debt, regret, and broken promises. I didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. I didn't pretend that everything would be okay. I laid down the law, my voice calm but firm, the voice of a woman who had learned to stand up for herself, to protect herself, to value her own worth. I would help them financially, but it would be a loan, not a gift, with a strict repayment schedule, a contract drawn up by my lawyer, a clear understanding that this was a business transaction, not a family bailout. I would help them find a lawyer for Hannah, a good one, but she would have to cooperate fully, tell the truth, and accept the consequences of her actions. And, most importantly, I would not be moving back. I had my own life, my own business, my own future, a future I'd fought hard to create, a future I wasn't about to jeopardize. My mother, predictably, balked. She still clung to the fantasy that Hannah was just going through a phase, that she'd learn her lesson and magically transform into a responsible adult. But my father, for the first time I could remember, intervened. He agreed to my terms, his voice quiet but resolute. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: respect. And maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of understanding. It was the start, however small, of something that might eventually resemble healing. Hannah, of course, resented my interference. She saw me as the enemy, the judgmental older sister who'd abandoned her, the one who was now lording her success over them. She accused me of being cold, uncaring, of not understanding what she was going through. She couldn't grasp the concept of boundaries, of consequences, of personal responsibility. She was still stuck being Hannah. I stayed for a week, a whirlwind of legal consultations, financial assessments, and emotionally charged conversations. I helped them navigate the immediate crisis, setting up payment plans, negotiating with creditors, and finding resources to help Hannah deal with her legal issues. It wasn't a solution, not a permanent one, but it was a start. It was a way to stop the bleeding, to buy them some time, to give them a chance to rebuild. Before I left, I made one thing crystal clear: I was doing this for Lily, Hannah's daughter, the innocent child caught in the crossfire of her mother's reckless choices and her grandparents' enabling behavior. I wanted to ensure that Lily had a stable future, a chance at a life that wasn't defined by chaos and dysfunction. I wasn't doing it for Hannah. And I certainly wasn't doing it for my parents. I returned to my life, my business, my friends, my chosen family, with a mixture of relief and sadness. The visit had reopened old wounds, reminded me of the pain and rejection I'd endured, but it had also reinforced my sense of self, my strength, my resilience. I had faced my past, confronted my family, and emerged stronger. Not unscathed, not completely healed, but stronger. And that's where the story continues. It's not an ending, not a neat resolution, but a messy, complicated, ongoing process of growth, forgiveness, and acceptance. It's a journey, not a destination. Update 1. 6 months have passed since that tense reunion. My father, surprisingly, is adhering to the repayment plan with a diligence I never thought him capable of. He's even taken a part-time job, something menial, but it's his, and it's contributing. My mother is still my mother. She calls, less frequently now, the guilt trip's less intense, but the underlying resentment still palpable. She still sees me as the one who got away, the one who should have sacrificed everything for the family. Hannah is in court-ordered therapy, a condition of my continued financial support, which is primarily directed towards Lily's well-being. It's slow, painful progress, but it is progress. Update 2. A year. My business is thriving, expanding beyond anything I'd imagined. I've hired a small team, moved into a real office, and I'm even starting to get some recognition in the industry. The biggest development? My father is now working for me, part-time. He's surprisingly good with numbers, organized, and reliable. It's awkward, sometimes, this new dynamic, but it's also good. We're finding a new way to connect, not as father and daughter burdened by the past, but as colleagues, as adults. My mother still refuses to acknowledge my success, calls my father a traitor for working with the enemy. Hannah calls. Occasionally. Usually when she needs something. But sometimes, just to talk. Baby steps. Update 3, 18 months. I bought a house. A real house, with a yard, and a view. My house. No help from my parents, no strings attached, just the product of my hard work, my determination, my unwavering belief in myself. It's a symbol of my independence, my freedom, my success. A testament to the fact that I made it, despite them, not because of them. Dad is thriving, he's found a sense of purpose he hasn't had in decades. He's even taking some community college classes, exploring new interests. Mom remains silent, a distant, disapproving presence in my life. Hannah sent Lily a birthday card. She addressed it to me. To have me give it to her. It's a small gesture, but it speaks volumes. Final update, 2 years. I'm engaged. To a wonderful man, David, who sees me, the real me, the woman I've become, not the responsible daughter I was always expected to be. He knows my story, all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, and he loves me anyway. He supports my dreams, he encourages my ambitions, he celebrates my successes. He's everything my family isn't: kind, compassionate, understanding, and genuinely, unconditionally loving. My father will walk me down the aisle. He's been practicing, his steps a little unsteady, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and regret. He told me, just the other day, "I'm so proud of you, Olivia. I wish I'd been a better father." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. And it was enough. My mother won't be there. She hasn't explicitly refused, but she hasn't responded to the invitation, either. Her silence speaks volumes. It's a painful reality, but one I've come to accept. I can't force her to love me, to accept me, to be the mother I always wanted. I can only control my own actions, my own choices, my own happiness. Hannah? Maybe. She's trying. She's still in therapy, still struggling, still making mistakes. But she's also showing signs of growth, of maturity, of a willingness to take responsibility for her life. She even apologized, a few weeks ago, a genuine, heartfelt apology, for everything. It doesn't erase the past, but it opens a door. A small door, to a possible future, a future where we might, just might, be able to build a relationship, not as the golden child and the responsible one, but as sisters. And Lily? She's thriving. She's a bright, curious, loving little girl, who deserves a better life than the one she was born into. I'm committed to being there for her, to providing her with the support and stability she needs, to being the aunt she deserves. That's a promise I can keep. My story is far from over, and my family will more than likely always struggle. But I am free.